Hello, I'm Rosemary Hannah. Welcome to the series, The Bahamas Then and Now, where we talk about our history, heritage, arts, and culture, and those persons who were involved and some who continue to be involved in guarding our heritage. We'll be right back. Our guest today is Adrian Archer, Director of Music at Christ Church Cathedral. Welcome to the show, Adrian.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
It's wonderful to have you here. I have lots
here.
of questions for you, too. First of all, tell us about your childhood, Adrian, where you grew up and the influences in your life.
Well, I grew up as the nerdy boy. My parents, Brenda Archer and Anthony Archer, and my grandparents, Willie C. Robinson and Cyril and Agnes Archer and Walter Archer. We grew up really in the pond, as it's known now, as people have designated. And I grew up as a young man interested in music. My mother plays the organ. She's been playing for 55 years. My grandmother Agnes played for 70 years. We all played some instrument or the other. Our lives revolved around church. And so I grew up in Oaksfield Primary School in the National Arts Festival singing as a boy. At the piano at Mrs. Mallory. She taught me to play piano, and I spent most of my time in church. I actually grew up thinking I would be a priest. That was my first recollection and my first intention. And so I grew up doing that. I grew up really studying a lot and doing a lot of music because that's what I really loved. So
what were the things that were instilled in you and your siblings and other children, you know, when you were growing up?
Well, my mother, like I said, was really entrenched into the church, and my parents and grandparents. My grandfather was an altar server. My grandmother was an organist at St. Matthew's Church. And so we spent lots of time around the church and lots of time really grounded into the Anglican faith that we were. Lots of time being disciplined, studying. My cousin Dudley Strawn was the principal of St. John's College, and so I couldn't get away with anything when I was at St. John's because he and my mother were very close. And so when I wasn't doing music, I was studying. And no, I had fun. I don't play, I didn't. I did. I had a really good time as a youngster. But I spent most of that time working and doing music. My influences really were my parents, my mother particularly, and my grandparents particularly. They kept a tight-knit family. And I really appreciated the fact that my grandmother, in particular, Mrs. Robinson, really had every occasion for families to get together. So we grew up, you know, having Easter, Christmas, whatever event or holiday it was a time for family gathering. So that's really where I come from in terms of my grounding.
Talking about school, although you're a relatively young man, what's the difference now between when you went to school and what you see happening today with our school children?
Well, when I went to school, school extended past the school hours. You know, I mean, I came out of school, I would leave school at 3 o'clock. I went right to music classes. I was at piano until 4:30. And when I came out of that, I went home and I had maybe an hour and a half to twiddle around, and then I had homework. And I didn't have a chance to wander the streets. And when I wasn't doing that, I was doing something that I thought was constructive, certainly that my parents thought was constructive. And so I don't know if there's a difference, but we didn't have a chance to really be television type children. We had a television. It came on when my parents felt like we had accomplished everything we needed to accomplish, and that came on as a treat. And then by 9 o'clock, you were in bed. Even into high school, when I thought that I was a grown-up, at 15, 16, there was a time when there was time to go to bed and to get ready for school, and really a disciplined, regimented life, which I feel really helps me a lot in my adult life now.
Now, I know that you spent quite a few years at the Ministry of Tourism. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, honestly, Rosie, when I left high school, my intention was to be a priest. I left high school at age 15, St. John's College. I graduated very early, and I intended to be a priest. I'd gone to the Anglican Church. I had presented myself to Bishop Eldon, and before the sort of a board that decides who's going to be a priest. And I had been accepted, but I was too young to go to Quadrington College. And at the time, Clement Maynard was the Minister of Tourism, and he sat on the board, and he said to me, if you could qualify to work at tourism, I'll accept you to work for me for a couple of years and then you can go to Codrington. Well, 24 years later, I never went to Codrington. 24 years later, I was still at tourism in the public relations department, heading that unit in the audiovisual department and PR and marketing and advertising. And so I spent lots of time traveling, which I really enjoyed. I was happy to be the person to initiate the audiovisual department at the Ministry of Tourism, which is now a big full-time graphics department. And so that we were relying upon ourselves to produce our own television shows and so forth, and local PR and working with local tourism awareness programs. So that was really what I liked a lot. I loved the marketing, public relations world. And I just gave it up because it was time to give it up.
Yes, I was going to say, ask, what motivated you to leave that good government job to go away and study music of all things?
Well, music has always been my passion. And I always said to myself when I was working for the government, that if any day I came to work and I sucked my teeth and said, that's it, I can't do this anymore, I would resign. And I did. I literally one day went into the work, but by that time the Ministry of Tourism had burnt down to the ground. We were separate satellite offices. And one day I went to work and I said, I don't want to do this anymore. So I called up the Director General, Vincent Valpalis, and I said, I'm going to resign today. And he said, rubbish. And so I sent him a letter. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell my mother, I didn't tell my siblings, no one. I sent him a letter, and then he called me in and he said, you know, you're going to work for the church. The church is worse than working for the government. And so I said, perhaps it is, but I'm going to do what I want to do. I've done the stuff that I felt my contribution here, and now I'm called to the church. Still thinking about the priesthood, I really was. And I had been offered an opportunity to go and study at Princeton University and study at Princeton Theological Seminary. And it just happened to be the most wonderful music conservatory in Princeton as well. And I got the headline from it from Father Fred Fleischer. He said to me, have you ever heard about Westminster Choir College? And I said, no. And he said, you have to check it out. So that's what I did. I left. I took my gratuity that the government offered me. And I said I would spend the first year of it in college and that I would try to be as impressive as possible at college to get scholarships, which weren't always offered to international students, but thankfully in the music realm, there were lots more scholarships than in the other technical realms.
So how did your mommy react and your siblings when you decided that you wanted to take that direction? She thought I had lost
my very mind because, you know, I spent 25 years, I was 5 years away from retirement, whatever that means in the government. But she knew that I spent many years directing the choir at St. George's where she is the organist. And she knew what my passion was. And I said to her, give me a chance to, you know, let me just do this. I don't know where it's going to end up. At the end of the day, I have no idea when I come back, whether I'm going to come back at all. And if I come back, what I'm going to do with an $80,000 degree, I have no idea. So I spent a couple of dollars of my own and a couple of dollars of hers. And, and then I got scholarships at university. I was able to work on campus. I was able to work in the chapel there as a counselor. I was able to work as a tenor section leader at my church and as a director at my church at All Saints in Princeton.
You became part of a family up there. Tell me about your family in Princeton.
I still have my family in Princeton. My family was at All Saints Episcopal Church in Princeton. I still have so many close friends there. I have, oh my goodness, the Cashins in New Jersey who now live in Cleveland. I have so many close friends and so many close mentors as my professors who even now are sort of looking at Facebook, seeing what's happening in my life, what's happening with my church. I send them all my repertoire of music for them to examine, you know, to look at it from a musical standpoint. I send photographs. And so I never feel distant from them. And thankfully, this university is a place where all the nerds go. You know, as a musical nerd, you know, you direct air. Everybody directs air at Westminster. Everybody has a pitchfork. They're trying to listen to the A. Everybody is sort of singing and humming and playing. And so I felt so at home. I felt like, you know what? This is where all nerds go. All nerds go to heaven right here at Westminster. So it was great.
So it was a society of nerds.
It was a society of nerds who actually spread around the world and just do a... You know, when I went to Princeton, honestly, I thought I went to musical heaven. I walked in at a rehearsal, the first rehearsal that I, as a student, just wandering around the campus. They were doing Brahms' Requiem. And they were doing the piece about how lovely is thy dwelling place. And Rosie, I walked into this, what's called the Playhouse, the major rehearsal hall, and they were singing, and I thought I was listening to a recording. And I thought, this cannot be real music. I mean, as I was to learn it to be. Then soon enough, I was one of those people where people would walk in and watch me sing and watch me conduct. And I thought, this is good. I could die now. This is good stuff. It was great.
So you found where you belonged.
I found where I belong.
Yeah,
and
right.
I found what I love to do. And I love to do it. And no matter how much stress it may bring, no matter how much tiredness it may bring, when I'm doing it, I feel nothing. Now, when it's finished, I may be exhausted. But when I'm doing it, when I'm engaging people in using their voice and music, I love it. And so that's why I do what I do.
So when you were abroad, where else did you travel?
I had an opportunity, well, the university has lots of what they call runouts, where all of its ensembles, singing ensembles or bell ensembles go to different places. So we had a chance to go to Europe, to spend some time in Italy, where I learned to speak Italian, decently enough to be able to conversate. And then we performed with the New York Philharmonic, with the Philadelphia Philharmonic. We performed really some of the major works of sacred music, of classical music. The Messiah, who sings the Messiah in its entirety more than 3 times? You know what I mean? That's the sort of place that this is. To do, big, huge, the Elijah, the creation, these things which you just have a CD of. When you actually are sitting in a place like Riverside Church, and there in front of you is the New York Philharmonic, and you happen to be like the first tenor there, and someone says, come and get up and conduct us in this movement. I mean, really? Little old me from the Bahamas? You gotta be kidding. It's like a dream come true.
That was quite a thrill, wasn't it?
No, it was a thrill. No, it was
wonderful.
a thrill. And even just conducting school ensembles is a thrill, because the people know the music, they can read the music. You don't spend so much time in the laborsome task of teaching the music. You spend more time creating the music.
Well, Adrian, we have to take a break now.
Okay.
This has been so invigorating and informative. We'll be right back.
You're watching the Bahamas Then and Now. This episode is brought to you by the Private Trust Corporation Limited, Dungalik Studios, and Vodio.
This is the Bahamas. 700 islands, reefs, and keys, sporting a distinct history and heritage all its own. This is New Providence, most populated, industrialized island at the center of the archipelago. Home of Nassau, the capital city, seat of parliament, location of political and social revolution, site from which our nation declared its independence. And this is Over the Hill, a community, a series of neighborhoods in what was then considered Southwest New Providence. Settled by slaves, having served as the midwife of national deliverance. Over the Hill, a breeding ground of nation builders, constructing trait by trait, precept upon precept, character-toting, culture-shaping leaders. Over the Hill, where independence was born, where the naval string of Bahamianization is buried, where Junkanoo got polished. Over the Hill, where sense and sensitivity were kneaded into the dough of children's souls, where people reverently genuflected to the image of God in every man. Over the Hill. East Street, Market Street, Blue Hill Road, Baintown, Grantstown, Anderson Street, Augusta Street, DeFort Hill, McPherson Street, Over the Hill, McCullough Corner, Hay Street, Glinton Square, where? Mason's Addition, Jail Alley, Lewis Street, over the hill. The Coakleys, the Smiths, the Johnsons, the Blydens, the DeStoops, the Grants and the Coopers, the McPhersons and the Pindlings, the Allens and the Winders, over the hill. The Hannahs, the Bostricks, the Burnsides, the Bethels, the Walkers, the Enuses and the Thompsons, the McCartneys and the Gibsons, over the hill. What if we went back and dug into the soil of our glorious past? And what if we studied the roots and found the patterns of Bahamian unity and success and progress, and superimposed those on the social ills of Lil Nassau, the social ills of the Bahamas in general? What would happen? What would happen if we really understood where we came from? Our heritage is not ghetto. Our language is not profanity. Our resolution is not violence. We are Bahamians, kings and queens, gentlemen and ladies, athletes and warriors in every sphere, geniuses and priests, artists and leaders, and much of it started over the hill.
You're watching the Bahamas Then and Now.
Welcome back. We're talking today with Adrian Archer. Adrian, before the break, we were talking about your travels abroad and the places that you went. But now let's get back to the local scene. Once you came back home, what was your first order of business?
Finding a job. That's my first order of business. I'd come back for 5 years in college, and my mother said, get a job. And so I ended up, thank God, I had a job as administrator of St. George's Church before I left. Father hadn't replaced me, so I went straight back to that job. And I also was able to pick up my work at St. George's as the choir director there. But it wasn't long. It was within a year. The dean called me and said, I need to have a conversation with you. This is Dean Adley. So I went to his office and he said, so what are you doing musically? I said, I'm at St. George's. He said, no, seriously, what are you doing musically? I said, my priest would be very insulted if he thought for 1 second you're trying to rob me from St. George's. He said, okay, well, let's be real. That's what I'm trying to do. I want you to come and work here. And I went back home and I told my mother, and I must say, I felt really bad about it because the people at St. George's had supported me. My mother, who is the organist, is not a choir director, and she'll let you know, if you don't come and direct the choir, I certainly won't. I'll play the organ and the piano, but I'm not going to direct. So we need to find something to do. And then I said to her, sweetie, your investment has to pay you back. So I need to go someplace where I can actually do lots more stuff and get paid. So God blessed me with a job that allowed me to get a decent enough salary, resources musically that could cause me to use what I learned. And so I took up the job as director of Christ Church Cathedral, as a music director there, in charge of all the musical responsibilities, which I enjoy very much, because I think from that platform I can affect perhaps the Anglican community, perhaps the musical community as a whole, because lots of things center at the cathedral for various things. So I'm hoping that having this job helps me to help other people to be better musicians.
Actually, I think you're the perfect choice for them for that job. And you know, now you're a musician very, very much in demand. You have your High Grove Singers, and there were two significant events that you were part of, Sammy Swain and Music of the Bahamas. Tell us about those two events.
Well, Philip Burrows asked me to be a part of both of them. And I have to say that this is where my experience was not as what I wanted it to be. This stretched my abilities, because you don't necessarily think of a classical musician running a cultural sort of local production. But I was never going to say no to the opportunity to work on music of Clement Bethel, never, because I became a musician, particularly in the choral world, because of Clement. Clement asked me at age 13 or 14 to join the Renaissance Singers. I was the youngest member of the Renaissance Singers. And I remember very clearly at his house in Johnson Road, sitting to the piano, auditioning, being part of the group, being very afraid, learning how to read right at his feet. And the very idea that I would be the person that they would ask to resurrect Sammy Swain. The last person to be the musical conductor of Sammy Swain was Clement.
Yes.
That was a long time ago. And I remember how it influenced me. And I wasn't going to, even if they'd asked me to sing in it, I would have jumped at the opportunity. But then to be the music director was another thing. I could not wrap my head around the fact that they, one, asked me, two, to conduct it because I felt a little bit intimidated by the enormity of the task. But this is where training comes in. You know, I was trained as a choral musician. This is choral work. Most of the Bahamian music, whatever our cultural identity is, always sort of defaults to singing, no matter what our experiences are, whether we are a nation in grief, happy, whatever. We have this singing bit in the Bahamian spirit. And so I wasn't going to turn that opportunity down. So I was so privileged to work with people like Lee and Philip, to work on Cleophas Adley's music, to work with Joanne. Who would have been, I'd have been an idiot to say no. And so that few months was one of the hallmarks of my music career, because it took me out of the church, for one. It gave me the ability to understand that I actually could do something like this, so that it made me think in a broader scope. And it's something that I will never forget. Both of those productions, really important in my life.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. Adrian, let's talk a little bit about culture generally. You know, some people have the mistaken belief that Junkanoo is the sum total of our culture. What is your definition of culture?
You know, I've thought about this a lot. Since working with music in the Bahamas and Sammy Swain, I've had an opportunity to think about this a lot. I'm not certain that we can put our finger on the pulse of what Bahamian culture is. I think we like Junkanoo because we know it's particular to the Bahamas, and so we recognize it as belonging to us. I think that the culture of the Bahamas, the culture of the way we express ourselves is our culture. It comes off in very many ways. It comes off in food, it comes off in music, it comes off in dance, it comes off in speech. It comes in so many ways. Now, how to wrap that in a package and say this is Bahamian, I think is a little bit difficult. I think there's no sort of, this is who we are, because we are constantly being bombarded from all sorts of forces, different cultures. We're actually creating it all the time. Our culture creates itself over and over again. Now, of course, we have to be careful that we don't be influenced too much by other people's cultures, which are easily identifiable. Reggae, etc., etc. Those things are identifiable. Our culture may have specific beats, specific rhythms, specific musical instruments. And I think that that is something that we are constantly creating over and over again. Each generation adds to it. I think my experience, the Music of Bahamas, has added to what it was when it was first produced 30, 40 years ago. When it was staged for the Queen 25 years ago. What we did last year was not the same thing. We added different things. You see what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
So I think it's always revolving.
Talking about that too, you know, we used to have the Festival of Arts and Culture, and that used to be a very popular thing, but today we don't seem to hear much about it in the schools.
Well, you know, it's now the Clement Bethel Arts Festival. I think that's what it is.
Yes.
And I think that is because we are so inundated by other things that what needs to rise to the fore, meaning our culture in our schools, is probably not where it should be. And it comes from the leadership, doesn't it? If you have good leaders who are serious about culture, who are serious about getting teachers who are serious about it, and just not something they do by the way. You can see it in pockets around the schools, I feel. I've had the opportunity to go to one of these sort of National Arts Festival presentations of all the winners. And I'm amazed at some of the wonderful stuff that's going on, but you don't see them or hear from them on a regular basis.
That's a pity, because I don't think we get enough they get enough publicity.
No, they don't.
When they have the spelling bee, there's lots of information in the newspapers and like that. It's just not publicized enough.
I think you're right, and I think that that's something that technically could be worked on in terms of public relations and PR and advertising. Lots of things like that, you hear by the way, or it's already gone, and
yes.
you wish that you had attended it, and it was already gone.
Then, at one point you hear they're having the final concert, but didn't know what led up to it.
Exactly. And the thing too is I think it's enough to take around, really it's where our political influences are. Not even where our national influences are, let's say.
Yes.
If you can have enough of concentration to go behind, the Prime Minister or Minister with a camera, you could follow the adjudicators to the National Arts Festival with a camera.
Yes.
Why is that not a priority? That is where those are questions that we have to ask.
Now, how do we go about getting our people to understand and appreciate what we have, the value of what we have?
That's a hard question, Rosie. I think people have to have a little bit more self-respect for who they are first, before they can respect what they have. I've experienced a lot in the last couple of years in terms of crime and so forth, and I just wonder about people's self-respect. How do you respect yourself as a Bahamian identity, if you don't respect yourself as the person for who you are? That's, I think, where our cultural issues are. Our culture has led us to a place where people have no respect for themselves, for God, for their teachers, for education, for any of those things. We're growing up, and if we don't figure out a way to arrest all that right away and say, who are you? You're a Bahamian. What does it mean to be Bahamian? What does it mean to be proud to be Bahamian? Those are the questions that we have to answer before we can really talk about our cultural identity and keeping that alive.
So what are your hopes for the Bahamas, culturally?
I want a Bahamas, for me, that allows me as a classical musician to identify with the genre that is Bahamian music and culture. I think that most people think that as a classical musician, there is no place for you. I find...
But you prove them wrong.
Yeah, and look at Cleophas Adderley, whose choir is, who Cleophas writes tons and tons of choral music based upon themes that are Bahamian. I thank God for someone like Cleophas Adderley, because I think that if he didn't do it, and sometimes you listen to the music and you laugh and you think, how could you write a 4-part harmony based upon, 1 and 20, 2 and 20? But it is an award-winning piece of music. And so I want to be able to, in what I love, fit into the culture. I'm hoping for that for musicians everywhere in the Bahamas.
Adrian, a lot of the schools now have bands. And I think that one of the best is Yonel Justilians at Government High School.
That school has some of the best musicians. I think it's a charter school for musicians. So Yonel Justilian and that all-star band is amazing. But he is one of the many. There are lots of bands around us, musicians who are coming up. I wish there was a way for us to find out who these people are, so that when you need them for church services, yes, they're as easily as readily available as they are for Junkanoo. You have all of these bands that are part of the government program 2.0. I think that we are honing in on our innate musical abilities in this country by first introducing bands, then introducing voice, then introducing really instruments in churches and synagogues. That's the sort of stuff that we have to work on all the time. Identify these young people, get them into something that's wholesome.
Yes.
Because music brings discipline in any sphere, whether you're an instrumentalist, a singer, an organist, a pianist. It means sitting and rehearsing. It means knowing how to count. It means knowing how to pronounce vowels. All this brings back the stuff that you should be learning as a child, that I'm telling you takes you through life.
It does.
When I sat at Muriel Mallory's piano and she said, that bar has 3 beats, I knew what it meant. When I went to count 1, 2, 3, all of a sudden it became a musical thought. And I think that is what works a lot, yes, for the young people coming up.
Thank you for watching the Bahamas Then and Now. We encourage you to continue watching the series, and we urge you to invite your friends to do the same. Thank you so much for being with us, Adrian.
You're welcome.
It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure as well.